the significance of the 75th anniversary of all these amazing things that happened in 1947, there was one guy that I wanted to have here to talk about it. He is the preeminent UFO historian in the world. He's written absolutely some of the very best books on the topic. He's a writer, host of the series False Flags, which airs on Gaia TV. He's writing a book, another book. Today, when I tried to prepare for our conversation, I didn't really have a game plan on what he and I were going to talk about, a general idea. So I went to my bookshelves and looked for the Dolan section. It's a pretty darn big section. The UFOs in the National Security State, Volume 1 and Volume 2 are massive and massively important. When I started down this road myself years ago, the difficulty is how, as a journalist, do you tackle this topic? You can't go out and just look for UFOs or wait for them to show up. So what I decided to try to sink my teeth into was the paper trail, the documents. And there were a couple of books that were so critical back then to getting me started, and which I still recommend to this day. One is a book by Dr. David Jacobs. I think it was his PhD thesis, his doctoral thesis, and it's called The UFO Controversy in America, which is a great history of the events that we're going to be talking about here over the next 2 hours. And then there was one called Clear Intent by Fawcett and Greenwood, which was a book based on all the documents that were squeezed out of the U.S. government and the military in the early days of the Freedom of Information Act. Before that act was the law of the land, you write to the FBI or CIA or U.S. Air Force and ask them for, give us the documents you've got on UFOs. It just kind of scoff at you, and or deny that they had ever written about it or studied it. After FOIA becomes the law of the land, those same entities were forced to release thousands and thousands of pages. And Fawcett and Greenwood wrote about it in this book called Clear Intent. And it really influenced me because it was the kind of thing that, as a journalist, you could get your head around it. It's a paper trail that you could follow. And since that time, the books that have influenced me the most and which I hold near and dear are those two books that I just mentioned by Richard Dolan, the UFOs in the National Security State. It's not all light and welcoming our ET brethren here to save us. It doesn't predict that, the government's going to come clean and disclosures right around the corner. It's a very realistic account of where we've been and where we are likely going. And there are several other books on the Richard Dolan shelf that have influenced me as well, but he was the guy I wanted to have to talk about this, the 75th anniversary, this milestone, this benchmark, what it means, what we've learned, where we might be going. And Richard joins me momentarily here on Coast to Coast AM. There's a quote from UFOs and the National Security State, Volume 2, by Richard Dolan, where he goes, the implications of the UFO reality and cover-up are profound. It means our society has lived an official reality so incomplete, so inaccurate, it can be called fictitious. It means the history we've learned, the science we think we know, the very core of who we think we are need to be relearned. It's not exactly a rosy picture of our benevolent space brethren here to help us, or the idea that we're on the cusp of UFO disclosure at last, that the government's finally going to be honest with us. It is, I think, a very accurate picture of the way things really are. Historian Richard Dolan is the guy I wanted to have here to talk about the 75th anniversary, what it means, and I'm so glad that he's here. Richard, great to talk to you.
Hi, George. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for having me on.
Been a while.
Yes, too long. Hopefully that won't last forever.
So, 75th anniversary of Kenneth Arnold, 75th anniversary of that 1947 wave, of Roswell, of the cover-up, the creation of the CIA, the Air Force, all that stuff. For a historian like you and a UFO historian, those kind of benchmarks and milestones, that's grist for the mill, right? That's the stuff you eat up.
Yes, it really, truly is. You're exactly right. My goodness, we just hit the 75th anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's sighting, just June 24th, a couple of days ago. And it reminds me, because sometimes I forget as well, because we're all living in the present age, and there's a lot of UFO and UAP news that's always there for us to digest. But it is helpful to remember that this phenomenon has been very well recorded for a long time now. I mean, forget the ancient alien hypothesis. There have been some interesting, very, very old, let's call them UFO accounts, sure. But, people of the mid-20th century in the United States and elsewhere were very, very able to record strange phenomena accurately and indeed frequently with scientific instruments and precision. And speaking of Kenneth Arnold, he was a private pilot. He was out actually looking for a downed Marine transport for a reward. But he was a very capable man who had an extended sighting of these objects that became called flying saucers soon after that. And his sighting was he actually was able to time it for about a minute and a half, a long sighting. And he measured, he recorded. He himself was an excellent witness. I think we often forget just how good a witness Kenneth Arnold was. It's one reason his sighting, I think, became as well known as it was. But I guess I'm just trying to say the folks back in the 1940s were more than capable of accurately observing and recording this strange phenomenon. And, here we are in an era all these years later with the Pentagon essentially giving the same exact line that the military was giving in the 1950s. We don't have any true unknowns. There are things we cannot identify, but we do believe that with a little more resources we can identify, and I think the word was mitigate all of them. But in fact, they've been dealing with this with very sophisticated instrumentation and observations for a long, long, long time now.
It's like, they're patting us on the head. Go have your Ovaltine and go to bed now. We'll take care of this, everybody. It's all over again. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because so many of the lessons that were learned over the last 75 years have been forgotten or were never learned by the millions of people who are now dialed into UFOs because of the last 5 years and media coverage, things of that sort, who have never bothered to study the history. I mean, this is a topic where you need to understand the history. And what started in 1947, so much of what happened then is duplicated right now. Don't you agree?
Oh, my goodness. Most definitely. Most definitely. We went through an interesting history with the government's policy on this, because back in the 40s and 50s, the United States government had no choice but to acknowledge that there were unknown objects. I mean, the thing is, flying saucers, which is, it's what everyone called them back then, really exploded onto public consciousness after the Kenneth Arnold sighting. And so the military, the Army, then the new Air Force, they had no choice. They had to confront this. They couldn't just pretend that there was no such thing. Back then, the press was not nearly as controlled and centralized as it is today. There were actually lots of independent newspapers, very unlike the situation of newspapers today. I mean, we've got the web, which I guess is still a bit free, but maybe not as much as it used to be. But back then, there were many voices out there, and the military had to acknowledge it. What's interesting, just a little, bare bones history here, is that after about 20 years, by the late 1960s, the military was able to pretend that they were closing the book on studying this phenomenon. They had the infamous Condon Committee to study UFOs, and that was, I think, a rigged scientific study anyway. But as a result of that, the Air Force was able to say, well, we don't study this anymore. And so through the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and until very recently in our own century, the United States government was actually claiming that they were not studying UFOs, that there was no genuine UFO phenomenon or UAP phenomenon. So we had to go through that whole thing. And only now, since 2017, 2018, 2019, have we started to see the U.S. government admitting Oh, well, yes, we do actually study this to some extent. So we've graduated back to the 1950s, 1940s level of acknowledgement. It's, we like to think, well, we've made such great progress. We've actually gone back to where we were. We've graduated to the 1950s, where the government did admit it, but said, nope, nothing to see here. Go back to your lives, people.
1947 is the start of the modern UFO era, Kenneth Arnold, and then there's this wave. It's not only a wave of coverage about his story, but a wave of coverage about other instances and incidents in 47. What do you make of that? Is it the public reacting to media coverage and making stuff up, or feeling free to go ahead and tell about what they've seen, or was there actually an increased a wave of actual sightings in 1947, and if so, why?
I believe there was a wave of sightings. I absolutely do believe that. I've been wondering about this lately. It's great that you ask. Why is it, you really wonder, that people, human beings, never spoke about these aerial phenomena prior to 1947? We all know, you go back, historians have looked back and said, well, there were some interesting sightings prior to 1947. And it's true, there were. There are some very intriguing older like newspaper reports and stories and whatnot that when you look at them, you think, all right, maybe this is a much older phenomenon. And I personally think that that's true, and I suspect many listeners think that that's true. But the thing is it possible that even though we may have had a long-standing phenomenon, that something changed during the 1940s, or maybe the late 1930s, or in the 20th century? And I think that the answer is yes. I think that we, human civilization, very likely triggered a large-scale visitation or a large-scale arrival, maybe around the time of our Second World War. And the reason's not that hard to think about when you really consider, for thousands of years, human beings lived very simple. We had a civilization of horses pulling wooden carts, basically. There's not much we could have done about a UFO or flying saucer phenomenon, not much they could have done with us. But by the 20th century, we not only were, cracking the code of the atom, but we were doing all other kinds of things and developing computers and developing essentially the world that we now live in. And that's a world in which we're about to leap into their world. So I think personally that this triggered a large-scale observation, and we started noticing it in 1947. It actually, I think, was happening on a large-scale basis during the Second World War. We all know about the Foo Fighters, but once Kenneth Arnold's sighting became publicized, and that's really an interesting little story there, but it just got plastered all over the newspapers. Other people I think did feel liberated to say, oh, wow, I just saw something, and this is going on here, and that's going on there. During the day or the week of Roswell, there was a couple of photographs published in, I think it was the Arizona Republic, by a man named William Rhodes. He was in Phoenix, and he took a couple of photographs of an object that, it's kind of an interesting photograph. He was visited by, the FBI and Army intelligence in the aftermath of that, and many other people were reporting these flying saucers. I'm not going to say that every one of those reports was legitimate. Many were not. There were some crank reports there, but there were, when you look back over it now, we know that they were for real. And also, it has to be said, we know this now in retrospect. The United States military was encountering their own flying saucers and these types of reports starting at least, let's forget Roswell. There were other sightings as well. There was a very significant sighting at what is now Edwards Air Force Base in early July of 1947. It was called Muroc Airfield, and they had a series of 4 sightings in the afternoon of, I believe it was July 8th. They're really quite extraordinary, even to this day. So the military was having them. There was a lot going on in June and July. And in fact, what we, I guess we'll talk about Roswell in a minute, but
yeah,
Kenneth Arnold and Roswell are kind of like the bookends of the 1947 wave of sightings, at least in terms of publicity, because Kenneth Arnold's sighting kicked it all off, and the conclusion of Roswell, when they tried debunking it as a weather balloon, that pretty much signaled the end of the massive initial media coverage. It was as if the military said to the papers, we don't need to talk about this right now, not anymore. Coverage really died off by mid-July of 1947. Didn't go away, but it most definitely sort of, like it, stopped in a large extent.
So you would say 1947 is the beginning of the modern UFO era, the Kenneth Arnold, the wave of coverage, the wave of incidents, and then Roswell is the beginning of the cover-up. It's the beginning of the national security state. I mean, that same year, remarkably, the U.S. Air Force is created. The CIA is created. The apparatus that you describe in your books, the national security state, that's the foundation was built that year, and not coincidentally around Roswell.
Yeah, with one caveat, I agree with you. It seems pretty certain to me that there were elements within the U.S. national security apparatus that did already know about this phenomenon. The year before, there was the infamous ghost rockets over Europe, and we know for a fact that the United States military was interested in this. These were unusual, interesting sightings of objects first seen over Sweden, but actually they were seen throughout other parts of Europe in the summer of 1946. U.S. military definitely did have interest in that, and we know from years later, declassified report from declassified in the mid-'80s, that the Swedes back then, they were never able to explain this phenomenon. And then also we know that the Foo Fighters were looked at by U.S. intelligence. I think the OSS, in fact, was looking at it, and the U.S. Army was also looking into these, and the Army Air Corps, as well as British intelligence. So there was some understanding of the phenomenon. And, of course, then you've got rumors, of prior crashes. I mean, I wonder a lot about the Cape Girardeau event of 1941, for goodness sake, and was that the real deal or not? I think we don't have nearly the amount of evidence that we have with Roswell. Roswell's a shockingly strong case for a crash retrieval. But I do wonder that, Cape Girardeau in 1941, this in Missouri, might have been a UFO crash retrieval. I tend to think that it was.
We'll come back and talk about that. Richard Dolan, historian, author of UFOs of the National Security State, Volumes 1 and 2, is my guest. We're talking with Richard Dolan, historian, about the events that started 75 years ago this month. Kenneth Arnold's sighting that kicks off the modern UFO era, then the Roswell incident in early July 1947 that may be the impetus for the start of the cover-up. There were secret studies headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation behind the scenes. The military took it very seriously. They told something else to the public. That pattern has continued. So many millions of people have been drawn to the UFO topic over the past 5 years because of media coverage, congressional interest, who are unaware of the history of this topic. There have been peaks and valleys of public interest in the past. There have been peaks and valleys of congressional interest in the past. And just when we think we're on the cusp of learning something big, that the goodies are finally going to be opened up, the hangar doors are open, let us take a look at what's hidden. The keepers of the secrets slam those doors shut, and we're right back where we started. Richard Dolan has decades of experience and perspective that he's going to share with us on these developments and maybe give us some hope for the future. We'll be right back with more on Coast to Coast AM. Richard Dolan, before the break, you mentioned about Cape Girardeau, and we were discussing Roswell, potential crashes where there was recovery of materials, maybe bodies. As with those cases and many other notable cases since, seems like when you have something really good, a new witness has come forward, an incident that's fairly well documented, suddenly you have different forces descend on the scene, muddy the waters. alternate versions of reality are presented. Witnesses are discredited. Thinking about in one of your books, you wrote about Ed Walters of Gulf Breeze, for example, who had some really remarkable photos, and then somebody found a model of a UFO in a house that he left. Is there an organized program started back then in 47, continues to now to discredit cases like these, to discredit crash retrievals, for example?
Personally, I believe the answer is yes, I do. We know, I mean, just step outside of the UFO field for a moment. We know that the United States intelligence, British intelligence, we know, I mean, since particularly the Edward Snowden leaks revelations from close to a decade ago now, that the intelligence community does absolutely infiltrate organizations to stir up dissension, to create false information, false narratives. My goodness, the FBI was doing this for decades, still does it. During the COINTELPRO years of the 1950s and 60s, and they do it now. So, you know, you look at the UFO situation, there have been overabundance of intelligence officers, former intelligence officers, who found themselves into positions of prominence in the UFO field back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. The actions of many of those individuals were quite suspicious indeed. Look at the demise of the organization NICAP. That was probably the biggest UFO group of that time. And I think it's a very good argument to make that NICAP was torpedoed by ex-CIA operatives, frankly.
They not only infiltrated, they became officers, right?
Yes, high-level people, yeah. And they ousted the longtime director, Donald Kehoe, who was really, I mean, for a couple of decades, he was the voice of disclosure. He was the guy who's like, we've got to get open congressional hearings, and he ran NICAP. So, yeah. But then relating to the crash retrieval phenomenon, the answer again is yes. I think it gets muddy in the late 70s and early 80s. Like when we start talking about the Majestic 12 documents that leaked out in the 80s, to what extent that's disinformation and a complete diversion, or is there truth in those and not? And I think I try to take a nuanced position, but the fact is that what you had in the 70s was crash retrieval stories were starting to come out to researchers really for the first time, at the very same time that researchers were also getting released government documents through freedom of information, again for the first time. And that to me looked like a double 1-2 punch there that could have really damaged the efforts of the secret keepers. And so what ended up happening is that by the 1980s, you see the release of these documents, the MJ-12 documents, that were, you know, at first glance, very, they looked very persuasive, and then you had a couple of skeptics jumping in, proving, as they said, that these were fake. And what that did is it sort of threw cold water over both documents and the whole concept of crash retrievals. It was a really, on that basis, you could say it was an effective, you know, the Empire Strikes Back kind of a thing. I don't want to get too far afield, but I think the MJ-12 documents, my own opinion, is that there is truth in those.
You think there is an organization, even if it's not called MJ-12, that there would have made sense that there is or was, maybe still is, an organization that would coordinate all this stuff?
There's no doubt in my mind. I think that's absolutely right. So, yeah, there's an effort to keep this subject, to this day, basically asleep as far as the public is concerned. There's no question in my mind.
The recent discussion about bits and pieces of metamaterials, people like Lou Elizondo speaking behind closed doors and telling members of Congress that there's something really to it. Dr. Eric Davis, friend of ours, who testified at least one closed-door briefing. It says crash retrievals are real. Roswell was real. Does that give you some encouragement in the fact that at least somebody is hearing it? Or do you think that the keepers of the secrets are so good that we're never going to see that stuff? We're never going to see, if they've got intact craft, we're not going to see it. We're not going to see the bodies.
Well, I mean, Eric Davis, Lou Elizondo, I have a very high regard for both of them. And, I mean, I know there are people out there who try to smear these folks and to say, they're disinformation and whatnot. I don't believe that. It's one thing to have security clearances that you have to abide by, and both of them have that. So neither of them are at liberty just to go around saying every single thing that they might want to say publicly. But that's not the same thing as saying that they're part of disinformation. I think that their presence in this scene is a great positive. And if there's any chance, and I think it's a small chance, but if there's any chance that we're going to have a genuine government acknowledgement that's meaningful in some way, then yes, it would be through the efforts of someone like Dr. Davis or Blue, if they're able to get genuine behind-the-scenes action on this. But I don't think that's going to be likely. You know, we just had the UAP hearings in Congress a month and a half ago, and we were back to 1952, 1950,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
These things are out there. Well, we believe we can identify them all with just a little more resources. We don't think there's no discussion of them being extraordinary whatsoever, like as an alien. That didn't even come up. And it just, the whole thing was, to me, it just turned into a public theater. And there was really a couple of interesting things that came out. I was gratified, frankly, to see a reference to the Eric Davis notes on his meeting with Admiral Thomas Wilson.
Right.
I thought that was the single most interesting little truth bomb that got dropped there. And you notice how the two Pentagon spokespersons denied ever having heard of that document. Which
and that one, and never heard about UFOs over nuke bases, Malmstrom, anything like that. Oops, didn't know about that one either.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an incredible, non-believable answer. And, you know, unfortunately, members of Congress, they just decided not to challenge these two men from the Pentagon, which is too bad. But so, yeah, for those reasons, I just don't think that it's likely. I think if we're going to see something happen, it's got to come from somehow the public's got to get engaged. Somehow we need to present a powerful case that this phenomenon is still going. And here's one thing. I know we want to talk about the history, and I love that. But I just want to remind us all, the UFO phenomenon goes hot and heavy every single day around the world. Every day, there are an overwhelming number of really good sightings that people have. You know, here we're in North America, and it's really only in North America that there are a couple of publicly available databases that people can just report their sightings to. We've got the National UFO Reporting Center, which is just wonderful. There's MUFON. You realize between the two of those databases alone that there are over 10,000 UFO reports every single year from North America. And that doesn't mean that those are all amazing sightings of alien craft, but you go through those reports, I do, and a lot of them are very, very interesting. They'll make you sit up and go, wow. And the fact is that around the world, we know that sightings happen around the world all the time, and there's no reporting mechanism that's comparable so that other countries can do this. So we're really just guessing. But I think we're looking at thousands upon thousands of really good sightings around the world every year. And some of these sightings, I've been tracking sightings of dark triangular craft hovering in the middle of the night over people's homes at 200 feet altitude. This is the thing that happens every single day practically. There's something happening around the world, and it's important, and we want to ask, who are these beings, these guys? Is this military or is this not military? Either answer is very unsettling. So there's just so many things about the UFO subject that we are not discussing, and we could easily be. So I don't have a lot of confidence that the Pentagon is ever going to want to open this up. This is just, it's always been a can of worms for them because it brings out a long-standing cover-up, which they're never going to want to cop to. They're at the point where, well, there's something out there. We don't know what it is. No crash retrievals officially, even though Dr. Davis has mentioned this off, out of the public eye, but yes. And so they're just playing this game. It's a charade. And if they cop to a cover-up, if they say, yes, we actually have had crash retrievals, we have an intact saucer, which I think there's the rumor mill on this even recently is very intense. It's very strong, and I will say I strongly believe it. If they admit that, then there's a lot of explaining to do, and that gets into the whole structure of illegality and maybe even we could say criminality of secrecy, and they're not going to no one's going to want to open that up, not at all. And then
I was
they
told
have to admit, who are these beings? And then if you admit that, then you have to do something about it. And what if they can't?
Yeah, I was told years ago too that when it comes out, people would go to prison for diverting national security funds from where it was supposed to be and to keeping this cover-up going. 1947, the U.S. military starts studying this. There are secret studies behind the scenes. As you have documented in your books, they reach conclusions, hey, these are not ours. We don't think they're Russian. They're from somewhere else. They can fly circles around our best stuff. We're right back to square one. There's these wingless, propellerless. They have no rotors, no known propulsion, flying around. People try to voice the idea that it's some secret technology of ours or the Russians. We still are waiting to see that secret technology unveiled. And the same thing is happening now. You saw that in the congressional hearing. Those guys saying that the things that buzz the Navy ships, well, that's drones, that came out of nowhere, went to nowhere. We don't know who flew them. They're just drones. Don't worry about it.
No, exactly. Something's coming out of near Catalina Island off the coast of California. There's no question in my mind. That's a major hotspot of UFO, USO activity and has been for a number of decades. Lots of very well-recorded sightings over there. But with the Pentagon, it's like the narrative must be maintained at all costs. And I think that's really the problem. They've cornered themselves into a position where they have to maintain this fiction over and over again. Because to change it at this point means they're going to have to admit to having lied. And they just don't want to do that. It's not the Pentagon alone. It's the entire structure of power that is even behind the Pentagon. I think, when you talked about, I was mentioning that, the Eric Davis notes with his meeting with Thomas Wilson, Admiral Wilson, they had that meeting 20 years ago now. And when you get into an analysis of those notes, thank you, Dr. Davis, for taking such a detailed and sophisticated series of notes on that conversation. There's a lot of leads for researchers to go through, and I and some colleagues of mine, we've tried looking into, what is the structure of secrecy within the Pentagon's special access program system there? Where are these secrets kept? And what you obviously see is that a lot of this is privatized, gone into private power, and that's something that also that we need to be looking at.
Well, I know Eric really well. I was here when that meeting happened in Las Vegas. I believe that it is an accurate account of something that really did happen, that he shared with close colleagues, and it was real. I have no. I'm not surprised that Admiral Wilson would deny it. That's what he's supposed to do, but I think it was real, and the implications of that are significant. We've been down. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was personally shown several pages of that document back in 2006, long time ago, by one of those colleagues.
Yeah.
So I've known that it's real, and when you find these people, sometimes mainstream journalists or UFO researchers trying to debunk these things, it's beyond eye roll at this point. You just wonder, what are you thinking that all of these people have attested to the reality of it are just making this up? And just read the document. Just read the notes. Obviously is real. But they'll say, oh, well, Wilson denies it, and then just leave it at that. I just think, how absurd.
Well, debunking, ridicule, those things are alive and well. They happen every day. If you follow UFO Twitter, you can see it happening. A new witness pops his head up and gets pounded immediately. There's like a rapid response team for dealing with this stuff. it's not an accident. Part of what I'd like you to share with our audience, Richard, is about the Robertson panel. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'd like you to talk about the history of disinformation, debunking, ridicule. There actually was a meeting where they talked about that as a policy for our country. Talking with historian Richard Dolan about UFOs and the national security state. A lot of ground still to cover. We're talking with historian Richard Dolan about the big picture. 75 years ago, the modern UFO era began. 75 years ago, the Roswell crash occurred, and the cover-up and the national security state really got really got started. We're looking at progress that's been made in the last 5 years, encouraging developments, Congress taking an interest, mainstream media covering the subject. It feels like we're on the cusp of something big, and yet the same people still call the shots, the same people still control the studies, and the best evidence, wherever that's held, the best evidence, physical evidence, the best documented cases, sensor data, things of that sort, that's all matters of national security. We are told, as we have been for decades, that UFOs are not a threat to national security, yet national security is used as a reason to keep this information from us. We've had some dramatic instances at nuclear missile bases, over nuclear facilities, nuclear labs, whatever this intelligence is that flies these things around in our skies. It has an interest in our most powerful weapons and nuclear systems. And yet, the public is told something very different from what has been shared behind the scenes. It's been that way for a long time. Can secrets be kept? If Roswell happened, could that secret be kept? Even if it's kept in plain sight. Washington leaks like a sieve. That's what we're told. No secret of that magnitude could be kept. Is that true? We're going to get Richard Dolan's take on that when we come back here on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. As we mentioned over the course of this evening, 1947 was such a pivotal year, many different levels, one of which being that related to Roswell. Something crashed in the desert. You'll get disagreements on whether it was one crash or two, whether there was bodies that were recovered, the exact location of the crashes. Different witnesses have come forward with varying degrees of credibility over the years, but the story persists.
I think it was in 1990 or 91. I can't remember if it was Stanton Friedman or Kevin Randall. One of them interviewed General Thomas Dubose. And Dubose had been the assistant to General Roger Ramey at the Roswell briefing. So Dubose was, I think he was his chief of staff. He was his second right-hand man. And Dubose was interviewed in 1991, and explicitly, this is a recording, he said that was a cover story. He talked about how the cover-up operation ran. He said, this is more than top secret. This is the highest priority. And he was told by General Clements McMullen, who was one of the high-level people at Strategic Air Command. He said that he was the guy in charge, and he said to Dubose, you will say nothing about this. So here you have Dubose in 1990 or 91 talking explicitly about the entire the apparatus to cover this story up. And you're right, George. I think these guys, they were very good at what they did. And also, they had a lot of control over the media. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, that's the case then. That is the case now. And by control, I just mean a lot of voluntary cooperation by the media. This is around the time that we get the beginning of what was called Operation Mockingbird, something that all Americans still really need to know about. It was long-standing CIA and intelligence community manipulation of the U.S. mainstream media. Went all through the Cold War. And it's something that I think goes on to this day, but we know about Mockingbird.
Well, our friends, our colleagues, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, do some heavy lifting to get the story in the New York Times in December 2017 and stories since then. But they will tell you that they can't report everything they'd like to report, that it doesn't get past the editors even now,
Yep, that's right. Leslie said that to me early on very privately, but we all know, that those New York Times stories were very heavily managed by the the people upstairs.
We know that behind the scenes, from 1947 on, this topic is taken seriously, that there are very serious concerns about national security, and we know that the public is told something different. We also know that one weapon to keep a control on this is ridicule, the laughter curtain, or the intimidation that comes along with it. I'll give you an example, and then I'll ask for your take on it. Dr. Travis Taylor is somebody who's well known for his appearance on History Channel shows. I have interviewed him before, but he never, until a month ago.
Just recently, your interview was very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had interviewed him before, but he never admitted that he had another job. He had a secret job as chief scientist for the UAP task force, studying these military encounters. I think he came forward because he thought he was about to be outed, but he comes forward. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, he's got 5 advanced degrees. He's got a master's in astronomy and engineering, in physics. He's got 2 PhDs, optical physics being one of them. I mean, good gosh, it's pretty hard to get those degrees. He lends his expertise behind the scenes, not to be famous for it, behind the scenes. And when he comes out, I do this interview with him. He gets pounded on social media. Any kind of ridicule, they make fun of his accent as if that makes any difference whatsoever.
Wow.
It's as if anybody who pops their head up, they're going to get pounded. It's like the social media rapid response team. As an historian, you've written about the Robertson panel, this panel convened by the CIA way back when, and what they came up with as a national strategy. Can you share with our audience about that?
Most definitely. And in fact, what the Robertson panel recommended back in 1953, if there had been an internet back then, they would have recommended the exact types of debunking efforts that were directed against Dr. Taylor. But in 1952 was the last full year of Harry Truman's presidency, and that was a big year for UFO sightings. It was a massive year, and we don't need to go into all those details, but the reality is that by the end of 1952, the whole UFO issue was being discussed at high levels in the CIA and in military intelligence in general, because there were times during that summer where they thought, are we being invaded? Well, Edward Ruppelt, who ran Project Blue Book, literally stated that. He said if you'd walked into our office in 1952, you'd have thought there was an invasion underway. There were so many reports. And so by the end of 1952, this was a real problem. And so what they decided to do, the CIA convened a so-called scientific panel on this flying saucer business. And it met during the very final weekend of Harry Truman's presidency. It was in January 1953. The very following Monday, Dwight Eisenhower was inaugurated as president. So it was called the Robertson Panel. It was led by a man named H.P. Robertson. And they got together some very high-level scientists. And with they looked at some of the film recordings of these flying saucers that the Navy had, that the Air Force had. The fact is they met for 12 hours. The whole conclusion we now know was preordained from the beginning. And their conclusion was to debunk. That's the word that was used in their report. Debunk and demystify the UFO subject so that the public would not be interested. And it was a given for them. These are CIA-convened scientists. They said, we need to do this public education through the mass media, like television, which was a new technology at the time. That was like their version of the internet, in 1952, 53, through motion pictures and through written articles in the, newspapers and magazines. And they said, we'll get people like psychiatrists and astronomers and other celebrities to work on this public relations campaign. We'll get Walt Disney Corporation, which was very big even then. And so the whole idea was to influence public opinion. And they succeeded because, this is all classified. Nobody knew for the longest time that the Robertson panel convened. When it came out some years later, the researchers who found out it was a man named Dr. James McDonald, and he was furious. He found the Robertson panel files at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he just went on a rampage. But the fact was, this was a very successful effort by the CIA to debunk UFOs and just, again, to put the whole matter to sleep as far as the public was concerned. And it worked. And, if there was an internet, if there was social media in the 1950s, there's no question they would have made that recommendation as well. We'll get our people in social media to
I forget which of your books.
There are news stories out, but they're beyond UFOs. There are current stories out right now. We don't have to get into the details that show intelligence communities working with people on YouTube and other people in social media to debunk and smear in groups that they don't like. So it goes on to this day.
The picture that you paint about the national security state is pretty grim, pretty hardcore. I forget which of the books that you wrote it. It was something to the effect of a quote that had been delivered to you. America sees itself as like Luke Skywalker when, in some ways, we're Darth Vader. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. That was an old friend of mine. That was back in the 90s. And, my attitude is I've studied the United States history for much longer than I've studied UFOs. I've been studying UFOs a long time. But international geopolitics is maybe my first love in the academic world. And, you look at what the United States has accomplished. There's been many amazing things that America can stand, truly proud about. I love American history. I love the fact that I'm an American citizen. I'm very proud of that. But we have to look very clearly at some of the other things that's going on. The United States, in my view, is leading a global kind of a revolution, transform our world in so many ways. And it's not all, it's not all a bed of roses. So that's essentially my position on it. And the darkness is the fact that, we're going through a massive transformation globally. Part of it we can't help, and part of it I think is just by design. It's a global movement toward, what else can you call it internationally, but a digital kind of dictatorship, 24/7 surveillance and monitoring and control and propaganda. I think to reorganize all of human society. This is a totally different conversation, but this is what I think is happening. And, part of that transformation means very, very strong control over the information that citizens get. This isn't the 1930s and 40s and 50s anymore, where in many parts of the world people relied on and depended on and had what they believed was a free press. I think we're moving in toward a much more tightly controlled and managed type of society with a lot less wiggle room for things like freedom. And in that kind of a society, it seems to me that more, not less, control has got to be exerted by the state over information. And otherwise, things can get really kind of crazy. I mean, we've got this thing called the internet where people can research things that are often at odds with what the government wants us to have or wants us to believe. And what are we seeing? In the last decade, the internet's been more and more, I think, consolidated and gone under corporate control. Search engines are clearly dishonest in their results, weighting certain, results much higher than others for reasons of power. So that's our world. But we could see that world happening in the 1950s. And relating to the UFO problem, the UFO problem is, as you were just saying, it's a significant matter of national security.
Well, that's what...
It's more than that. I mean, it's just... Well, go on. You go.
I just wonder that if we ever... I mean, people are hoping for disclosure and this and that. Show us the body, show us the metamaterials and the craft. It's always going to be a matter of national security, isn't it? We're always going to want to keep information back from our adversaries. I just can't see any time where our military is going to be willing to cough up that kind of information.
Yeah, but, I mean, realistically, does any of us pretend that the Russians don't have their own information on this, or even by now the Chinese? So we say national security, we don't want to share. I'm sure that's true. But I think, there's a greater reality here in which the the information that's happening here. I mean, it's taken us 75 years of being involved in studying the subject to even maybe begin to grasp what's actually happening. I mean, who are these beings? Because there's someone that's behind it, and it's not us. And what does that mean? That they have been operating in a clandestine, massive, covert manner with what appears to be industrial-level infrastructure behind them to do what? To zip around the world, to have what appear to be secret bases, maybe everywhere, to fly over people's homes at 3 o'clock in the morning at altitudes of 300 feet over and over again. Why? And that's only beginning to scratch the surface of encounters that people have talked about over and over again, yes, with beings that don't seem human. Some that do seem human, by the way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those encounters. So there's something important happening here. Who are these beings?
Well, the biggest questions we don't seem to have answers to. We're talking with historian Richard Dolan about the big picture, 75 years of UFO history. You know, we look at the big picture on 75 years of UFO history and wonder, is there a reason for the secrecy? I mean, the visitors, as Richard Dolan was just telling us, the visitors have instituted secrecy. They've made it pretty tough to figure out what the heck they're doing, why they're here. If there is anyone who knows the big picture, knows the answers, I haven't found them. I mean, I don't know that Richard has either. Somebody who can answer all the big questions, who they are, where they're from, what their interest is in us. We'd like to believe that someday we'll get those answers, but is it possible there's a reason for the secrecy that is so horrible that maybe it really would destabilize us if it came out? I don't know. We're going to get back to my guest, Richard Dolan, in one last segment, take a couple of your calls as well in our final chunk of Coast to Coast AM. Richard, the optimist in me, and that's a little tiny, small part of me, can look at certain developments in the last year or so and be encouraged. You know, NASA, which has always been incredibly hostile to the UFO topic, now is willing to start its own study, although a measly $100,000 of a budget. I don't know how far they'll get. Congress has an interest. You know, they created this AIMSOG, this impossible acronym program. Who knows what the budget for that will be, or whether they'll look at anything other than lights in the sky and radar returns. Congress, if they aren't stay on top of this, who knows if it will make any progress at all. The U.S. Air Force, glaringly absent from any of these discussions. We now have, Roe v. Wade, gun legislation, a possible recession coming, gas prices. Congress, it's going to be hard for them to stay focused, don't you think? I mean, there are some good developments, but ultimately, I'm not all that optimistic.
Yeah. Well, I share that feeling. Unfortunately, I wish I didn't. And you're right. I think the crises that we're looking at now outside of UFOs, just the kind of global system, the economy, the inflation, the financial collapse for the stocks and crypto and gasoline, the war that's going sideways and then more sideways. This is all going to blow up, and I fear that just like with UFOs, where the narrative must be maintained, this is also true with a lot of other things. I know Coast doesn't want to get overly political, and I won't do it here, but you got a lot of angry people over the last 2.5 years. The whole COVID thing has just divided everyone, and there's a big blowback, and there's just a lot of things that I think will not be allowed to be discussed. That will include UFOs. They're going to be part of this. In other words, it would not shock me at all if we were to see a significant crackdown by a variety of centralized governments, including the United States, over internet, over more expression. And I think we have a good chance of going from bad to worse with just all of these crises, because they're going to cause public anger, public unrest, and that's just the perfect excuse to increase all these draconian laws that I mean, you think about what we've gone through in just 20 years. If we were to go back in time and visit the versions of ourselves from like 1999 and just say, hey, by the way, this is what the next 20 years is going to bring, we'd all be cowering in a corner in a puddle of tears and fear. We'd be like, my God, because what we've seen is the development of a genuine, what else do you call it, but a totalitarianism. I mean, it's not, I don't know how full-blown it is, but it's pretty far advanced. So I bring all of this up to say that the window for getting a genuine UFO disclosure, that's not going to be open forever. It may be closed now for all we know, but once we get to a situation where things get really crazy, even crazier than now, there's going to be, I just think it will be more difficult to have a genuine inquiry on this matter. And what disturbs me about that is, as I was just saying before the last break, we've been aware of this phenomenon for 75 years now. We've been aware. There has been an intelligence, and I'm just going to go say alien intelligence, that has been operating with great interest on this world. Now, I don't know for an absolute fact that they're malevolent toward us. I suspect that we're dealing with multiple groups, to be quite honest about it. There's just been enough variation in good witness testimony, at least what I think is good, to let me think that there might be more than one type of group that's watching us. And it wouldn't be surprising. I mean, we're at a very interesting and important stage of development. We might bring in the whole galactic neighborhood for all we know. But I think there's a definite possibility that there are beings or groups that are not in our best interest. Why would we think that all groups out there are in, some highly advanced spiritual form of development? I think that's a very foolish set of beliefs, to think that everyone out there is going to be our friend. We're not everyone's friend on this planet. What do? We cage all the animals. We control the ecosystem. We're top dog, apex predators. That's us. Well, maybe they are.
Yeah.
Maybe they are. Maybe they're used to getting their way. And so they've been here for 75 years without any open public inquiry. And if we're going to find out about this, maybe we really need to get moving here and stop pretending, oh, well, there's something out there, we don't know what it is. That's not helping. It's amazing that we've made some progress in the last 5 years. I'll just leave it at that.
Our friend and colleague Jacques Vallée, we both respect him immensely, has long held that this matter is a control system. Whatever they are, this intelligence, a control system of Earth. We have on top of that another, and maybe not on top of it, another control system, the national security state that keeps things. The intelligence, whatever it is, wherever it's from, it's the true architect of the secrecy, and our government so far is happy to go along with that. Do you think that there's anybody, you ever got a hint that there's anyone who knows ultimately what's going on, that we know for sure what could be disclosed should we ever choose to do that? We might have craft, we might have strange materials, we might have bodies, but not necessarily know where they came from or why they're here.
No, I do not know any one person who's got all of those answers. I mean, you and I both know some individuals who have some of those answers, at least from informed speculation and reliable information that has come their way. But I don't know of anyone who's got the whole picture or knows who has the whole picture. Like, who are those people? There have been all kinds of rumors. I've heard rumors many times of Bobby Ray Inman, former director of the NSA and much other naval intelligence. And, people have talked about Henry Kissinger, having very good knowledge of this phenomenon. But, do we know? Do I know? I do not. I cannot say that I could confirm it, no.
We'll take a couple of calls.
Information's got to be. People have got it. Someone's got it.
Well, they got more than we do, that we have, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we citizens, we have abilities as well. And I was surprised when I wrote my first book over 20 years ago. I received some interest from some individuals who were certainly far more knowledgeable than I was. But what I discovered is that they wanted a solid, reliable history, and they said, "Wow, you actually did something that's really quite useful for us." Not that these were spooks, but these are just very high-level, engaged people who are interested in the subject. So I think that there's definitely opportunities for citizens, researchers, to work off of the public data that we already have. There's thousands and thousands of reports. There's countless cases of apparent or alleged encounters with these beings. And there are some people writing about it, but we could use vastly more and rigorous treatment of this. We have our own opportunities here to step up our game and to present the case to the world. I mean, you're doing a fantastic job, and there are other people who are working at it, but we're a pretty small community when you really get down to it.
Sure. Well, I mean, maybe the ultimate way to get some answers is one-on-one, one close encounter at a time. That we learn this by they encounter us and share something in a one-on-one, and that's how we progress, as opposed to waiting for our government. Let's take a call or two. First-time caller Eric in Pennsylvania. Hi, Eric. You're on with Richard Dolan.
Hi, George. Hi, Richard. How you doing? Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I am a believer and a skeptic, and I find being skeptical is really useful. But after all these stories of the material that can't be burned, bent, broken, it comes back, memory metal, is there any information on how this ship actually broke apart, per se, like so that into all these pieces when it was supposedly indestructible?
That's a great question. Thanks for that one, Eric. And I don't know if I have the perfect answer for that. There are a couple of different rumored explanations for what happened at Roswell. First of all, I think George mentioned earlier, you got one story that it was one craft, another story that it was two craft in two different locations, and which I might lean toward myself, to be honest with you, but. No, I mean, I don't know if they crashed at high impact, though. Presumably, even something solid like a flying saucer could be damaged. There's lots of stories of downed UFOs. Some with a lot of damage, others with almost no damage. For example, there was a story of Kingman, Arizona, from 1953. That one, according to there were witnesses who were interviewed for this. They said it came down with almost no damage. So there are cases of these objects apparently being undamaged. But in the case of Roswell, yeah, there was some damage. But why it was damaged, I don't think I could tell you. Maybe
some people guessed, Eric, that it might be a lightning strike, or that the two craft smashed into each other. They were disabled by some high-powered radar. It's really speculation, but thanks for the call. Sorry we're not able to give you a solid answer. We're going to go to the wild card line. Bill in Los Angeles. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, George. By the way, I recently heard a 1953 Red Skelton radio show featuring a New York City UFO sighting, showing how embedded in the culture it was of the 1950s. Yeah, and it took a pretty serious. It didn't ridicule it. It took it pretty seriously, surprisingly. But a question for Richard: how did the Pentagon Disinformation Squad react to President Truman's annoyingly truthful disclosure that the Joint Chiefs were discussing, quote, flying saucers seen over D.C. twice that summer?
Truman, did. Well, I don't know how the Joint Chiefs specifically reacted. I don't know if I have a record of that. But Harry Truman a couple of times did speak publicly about these flying saucers. That's known. There was in one instance, I thought it was prior to 1952, where he acknowledged them. And I think he said, I wish I had this in front of me, but that they were not from any known nation. But he was also not indicating that they were anything that were extraterrestrial. I mean, Truman never publicly said anything about the UFO matter being extraterrestrial. he was absolutely, positively interested in this matter. And we know from a couple of sources that he was being briefed on this. Even Edward Ruppelt, way back in the 50s, stated that during the 1952 Washington series of sightings over the Capitol last summer, that he was on the telephone with someone named Colonel Robert B. Landry, who was an aide to Harry Truman, Air Force liaison. And Landry was Truman's point man for a while on all matters with UFOs, as far as we can tell. And Ruppelt wrote later, he said, I learned that Truman was on the line listening to Landry and me talk. Landry himself, in an interview he gave in the 1970s after Truman had died, said that in the summer of 1948 he was told to provide quarterly briefings to President Truman after consulting with the CIA and other intelligence on UFOs. And so that meant for 4.5 years, Robert B. Landry gave quarterly briefings to President Harry Truman on these flying saucers. He quickly added, all these years later, he said, well, we never found anything that was, extraterrestrial or a threat to national security. And I'm just thinking, yeah, you're interrupting the president during the Berlin crisis, during the outbreak of war in Korea, during whatever, and you're briefing him on these flying saucers every 3 months. And that was from him. So, I mean, it is a completely absent part of Harry Truman's public history. I read Harry Truman's 2-volume memoirs years ago. There's no mention of UFOs in that, but he was obviously interested.
Thanks for the call, Bill. Looking at recent revelations, suddenly these high-ranking intelligence officials who had never mentioned UFOs have come forward and said, yeah, this is serious. We need to take a look at it. Trump's people, Clinton's people, Obama's people. Obama, who was very dismissive of the topic while he was president, suddenly is saying, yeah, this is pretty serious. And Bill Clinton, who's always had an interest, George Bush, who is keeping to the party line, not saying anything. It feels like, at least at the higher level, at least some people are asking questions and wanting to get briefed.
Yeah. My feeling on all of this is that we've entered the internet era, in which citizen research has become a factor that they have to deal with. This wasn't a factor back in the 1970s and 80s, and maybe a little bit in the 90s. But it became an issue, and so I think what we're looking at really is just moving the goalposts and just changing the conversation just a little bit, just enough. They're changing the conversation just enough to keep people pacified. I don't want to be so cynical about it, but that's just what it seems like to me. That, a little bit of an acknowledgement that there's something going on, but you'll notice no one's talking about a cover-up. No one's talking about craft. The New York Times, Leslie and Ralph Blumenthal, in a couple of years ago for one of their New York Times pieces, came very close, I thought, to mentioning a crash retrieval.
Yeah, but it was stopped.
Yeah, they went right up to the edge of the cliff.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, are we going to take one more step? And, they haven't yet. And I think it's a formal acknowledgement of some kind of acquisition of ET tech. That's the red line.
Yeah.
And if they somehow go over that line, that would put us in a different ballgame, perhaps. And we came really close to it 2 years ago. So, to your question, is there cause for optimism? Is there a reason to believe? By the way, I love your music during the breaks. If there's a reason to believe, maybe that would be it. If we can get a genuine adult conversation about UFO crash retrievals, that would take this entire conversation to the next level, beyond lights in the sky, beyond, we wonder what they are.
Yeah.
Because once you acknowledge you've got the technology, you've got something, now you're going to have to explain some serious secrecy. And we may have a public that's wrapped up with a whole bunch of other issues and concerns that will distract us. But I've got to think, if you start telling the public Yeah, we actually had a flying saucer.
Yeah, they're going to ask questions. Richard Dolan, thanks so much for being here. You were the guy I wanted to talk to. You're working on UFOs in the National Security State, Volume 3, right? It'll be done next week?
I'm definitely working on it. I've actually been going full on in it, and it's been fascinating recently.
All right. Well, keep us in the loop. Thanks very much.